Who have gone cashless over the past 1 week?
I already have.
Wow. The three of us. Where were you?
I actually was in India for a week, and as you may have read, there's been a bit of a cash crisis in India. The Prime Minister decided...
Cashless because of cash crisis or because you're doing cashless?
Well, at the moment, the cancellation of the most popular notes, the 500 and 1,000 rupee notes, as an anti-corruption drive meant that people overnight suddenly found themselves having to line up every day at the bank to exchange notes.
Right.
And it was an interesting experience, actually not being able to change as a tourist. Effectively, I was there for business, but nobody had any cash.
Cashless for a different reason.
Yes.
What about you, Andy?
So I am cashless here in Beijing, and what that means is that I rely on WeChat pretty much for small transactions, buying a soda, buying a cup of coffee, even to buying plane tickets and train tickets and other large
You probably need
purchases.
to help our audience all over the world to understand what exactly is WeChat without doing an advertisement for them.
Okay.
So go.
Sounds good. So WeChat essentially is a social messaging app that has a payment system built into it. So it allows you, it's like an electronic wallet is the best way to think about it.
All right. And have you been using it? Or Alipay?
Yes, so both Alipay and WeChat I use regularly. In fact, it was an interesting experience recently. I was talking to a journalist about the whole phenomenon of cashless in China, and I was in a taxi, and I'd actually realized that the taxi would not accept cash. So I had to tell the journalist, I have to hang up now because I need to use my phone to actually pay for this ride. So it really hits you that it's actually quite hard now in some places to use cash.
Right.
Convenience stores in Shanghai, for example, a lot of them have just got rid of cash. It
You know,
costs
next
money
time
to
an
have
earphone would help you.
Yes.
But having said all of this, what would this really mean for the overall financial reform here in China and also the competition in the financial sector? This is going to be something really big. Andy?
Well, I think first of all, we need to recognize that the problem is not technology, but it's mainly regulatory, in that the potential is potentially enormously disruptive, because in restaurants you cannot have waitresses, or many fewer waiters and waitresses, because payment can all be automated. Banks, of course, there can be almost done away with. So it's both potential huge upside as well as potential dislocations of the economy.
Really? Do you agree with that? Half?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing how you've got two things going on. You've got technologies changing everything.
Yeah.
So, for example, Amazon recently is now trialing cashless but also cashierless supermarkets. So your smartphone is effectively detecting what you're purchasing.
That's
But we also have this trend towards a move away from cash, one from convenience, but also from governments that frankly want to control elements such as crime, corruption, etc. So we have to figure out how the balance is going to be struck between all of these.
As you may know, there are two online banks already established by, one is the Alibaba and the other is Tencent. And very likely, upcoming in the new year, there's another string of Chinese companies coming from all kinds of areas that are likely to run online banks. What would that mean for the overall industry, really?
Well, banks, as we know, are closing a lot of branches because having physical real estate, employing lots of people, costs money. Some of the banks, though, the incumbent banks, are pushing back, certainly here in China, against these online banks. So the idea of facial recognition technology to register an account, for example, the incumbent banks, the existing banks, are saying this is dangerous. We need to KYC, know your customers, very important to avoid money laundering and other things. But is this really just a defense to justify all their fixed costs and investments and employment? Or is there a valid reason for resisting technology?
Think?
Look, if I was a big bank, I would be saying it's very dangerous to use WeChat and Alipay and so on. But the reality is it's much more convenient for people. And there's no way they can fight against that forever.
So the convenience of it would definitely win over the slight chance of quote-unquote danger.
No, I agree, and I think in U.S. politics, people say where you stand depends on where you sit. So as Duncan was saying, the banks, the traditional banks are against it, and of course, the upstarts, if we want to call them that, the WeChats, the Alipays, are saying, no, this is not a problem. And I think partly it's self-interest, but I tend to lean more on the side that these cashless electronic payments are the future, and it is unstoppable.
what we say depends on where we sit. We are sitting on the chairs of CCTV, so let's hear what the Chinese people have to say about their choices. Let's turn to China. In a survey, 1,000 urban consumers carried out by FT Confidential Research, 98% of respondents said they had used the mobile payment platforms over the past 3 months. Alibaba's Alipay was the most frequently used payment platform, cited by 79% of the respondents. That is far greater proportion than those who said they most regularly used the credit cards, 45% of course, that is, and debit cards, 30%. Wow, see the change. Really, really big change. Having said that, we have to focus on what would this all of this mean once again to the overall China's financial sector. You touched on earlier, lightly, on the competition, but actually that competition is fearful. The pushback and pushing forward.
Yeah, and don't forget, the banks are, of course, increasingly going to be adopting these technologies themselves. They have to adopt. So the question is, will all the benefits go to the technology-centric companies, or will they somehow accrue to the existing players, the banks? And look, there's going to be a division of the market here.
You know, we have this debate about media also. Okay, platforms such as Facebook or Twitter, should they be responsible for the content that have been going on crazy on their platform? Some say, well, we are just a platform, we're not responsible. Others say, well, you have to be responsible for the content you're running. So there is an identity debate. Seems very similar to the online banks. They could say, we're just a platform, we're not responsible for the security. But they have to say, people would say, because you are banks now. So what do you make of that debate? Do we have regulations and legal structures to make sure it would work?
Well, I think the financial sector is such a crucial part of the economy that it has to be regulated. I mean, there's a couple of areas here. Of course, there are things like fraud. So if your Alipay or your WeChat account gets hacked, what do you do? But a less appreciated part of what banks do is they actually create money, because in today's world, money is created by what's called fiat. There's no gold backing up the RMB or the US dollar. So banks, without getting into too much of the details, it can actually create money. Similarly, the WeChats, even the Starbucks and the Apples with their stored value cards, in a sense, are creating money. And how is that regulated? Because that affects growth rates, interest rates, things like that at a macro level. So I think that the government has to regulate this, but how it regulates it, of course, is always the question.
The question is, the tech sector and the financial sector, they hardly work together. You could hardly find someone who is very intellect in both worlds. Don't we have a challenge like that?
Yeah, I mean, and this is an old story. I mean, but we're actually going back to the past. Until 1865, there were no notes in the United States. It was coins or privately issued forms of currency. And what we were just hearing about is these sort of, I mean, they all are linked to money ultimately, but there are these different forms of currency emerging. And when they're very useful, this is when, and when they're liked by people, this is when they become popular. So ultimately, you can't fight against the consumer interests. I think that's going to be the defining element of this.
And what about the competition among these cashless platforms, such as Alipay, such as WeChat, such as some of the future online banks? What is that going to be like? Without regulation, how would that work? Well,
there is regulation. I mean, there's still linkages between these wallets, effectively, to the banks, right? They haven't got their own completely unique currency. If you want to look at Bitcoin, then you're looking at more interesting things there, where you've had a very strong push from the technology guys against the established order, if you will. But again, we're seeing how some of that blockchain technology is being adapted by the incumbents. So, ultimately governments have power, right? I mean, and there are big attractions for them in terms of taxation as well as anti-corruption, that they're going to be getting involved heavily in this sector. So this is all playing out now around the world in different ways.
Well, I think, the other part that's important to look at is that companies like Alibaba and Tencent, they're also starting now to get into the lending function as well, which is how money, in fact, is created.
Right.
Because if you grant credit to your customers, now you're increasing the purchasing power in a country or an economy, which could have inflation repercussions as well. So I think the government needs to look at this not just from a consumer protection perspective, but also from more of a macroeconomic policy perspective as well.
While we are speaking, there was an important meeting apparently going on in New York in the Trump Tower between the President-elect of the United States, Donald Trump, his team, and also the tech leaders of the United States. Mr. Trump was talking about, tax cuts for businesses, and he's praising these tech entrepreneurs despite of his previous, shall I say, strained relations with them. But having said that, though, the question I really want to ask, Duncan, is what about the innovative power? I mean, we all understand financial sector, big money earner. That's why you see the new tech companies are running into this cashless business. But once they put so much energy here, will they still have the momentum to bring in new technologies and also innovate on the new tech sector? I think that is a big question.
Well, it's interesting, two of the tech leaders in the room with the president-elect actually come from a background of money and technology.
What are you talking about?
Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, who were both co-founders of PayPal. So in a sense, and look how Musk has gone on to do many other things in automotive and energy and many others. So I think the innovative capability of these individuals, of these brains and the engineers, is having impacts across society. The thing with money is that everybody touches it. So it's something that people can really feel. And I've just seen this last week when I ended up paying bills to somebody who I had to teach her how to go on. She didn't have a great education, but she's instantly using this and finding this very, very useful. So you're gonna see more people pushing for this stuff, and the innovators are going to be obviously enabling across all kinds of sectors. But money is a thing that touches everybody.
But that is the pragmatic innovation you are talking about. The applicable part.
Right.
But what about the real innovation? When it comes to high technology, when it comes to real competition, let's just say China is looking forward to establish.
Well, I would actually offer a contrarian view of what President-elect Trump is doing, because one of the things he talks about is deregulation. One of the stiflers that holds back innovation in the United States is a lot of the regulations and rules. So look at Tesla with self-driving cars. Well, we shouldn't have no regulations, but there is a balance to be struck. In my own view, I'm hoping and cautiously optimistic that by reducing government regulation, that actually will allow not just basic research and development to advance more quickly, but some of these new technologies to more quickly get to market. And there will be costs as well, because if you make it easier for driverless cars to roll out in mainstream society, there will be more accidents. But those are unavoidable. Just so you look at space flight.
There should be fewer
accidents
happen.
happen.
They're arguing there will be fewer.
According to the number, actually fewer accidents, but we do not know how is it going to be like when it's being tested. But why should we trust both of you? I mean, you are coming from the tech sector. Of course, your answer is pro them.
No, I mean, I think technology is a blunt instrument, right? I mean, you can go back to literally the stone, and creating fire. I mean, these are instruments that change over time. But the question is, how do we use materials and ideas around us to improve our lives? So I don't think anybody has a monopoly on that. The issue we're seeing now increasingly is that the tech firms themselves are so big, so powerful, that they are bumping into governments and also all the incumbents, the guys who've long dominated finance and media, etc. So as consumers, the question is, what do we do in this world? What influence do we have? And we do have social media, we do have ways to popularize technology in interesting ways.
Do we need to trust you? Can we really trust you, Andy?
Of course you can trust me.
What a question is that? But seriously, there's one question that is, what is likely to be the vision of these tech entrepreneurs in China? Because many of the things we talk about, the cashless, is coming from some of the most pioneering Chinese tech companies, like Alibaba, the e-commerce platform, and also Tencent. You earlier was writing a book about Jack Ma, who is the founder of Alibaba. After talking to him, what do you think is his vision, particularly developing, the financial part of his overall operation? How representative is he among all the tech leaders?
Well, Alibaba's success today has really been based on one thing, which is trust. They've won the trust of consumers online to buy things and pay for them online, and also have things delivered.
There was also debate about their credibility.
And anytime there is an issue, internal fraud or kind of problems, that's the most sensitive thing that happens with Alibaba. And that's the point, is that trust is how he will hope to move into financial services, into entertainment. Because Chinese consumers crave trust. They crave authentic goods. They don't want to get ripped off. They don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want, so that is really the fundamental underpinning of these new economy companies. And same for Tencent, the ease, but also the ability to rely on the technology. It is reliable. You can rely more on your cell phone than you can your wallet.
But how much reliable are they if there are only very few of them? At this moment, we only talk about two, which is the most established. So will there be monopoly? Should we worry about a monopoly at this early stage already? What's next?
Yeah. Well, I think it already is a monopoly or a duopoly, with Alipay and WeChat as the dominant payment providers in China. But I think we also have to recognize, too, that whoever has the most data wins, and that especially Tencent, because they're closer to the consumer, and they're collecting not just your transaction data, your WeChat data, but even where you are when you're talking to people, what time of day it is. And that is very valuable, but it can also make people uncomfortable, and there are clearly privacy issues around
Should we worry about monopoly or not? Very quick answer.
I think no, because economies of scale outweigh any risk from a monopoly.
Agree?
No.
Final word.
I'm worried about monopoly. We should all be worried about that.
Well, I'm sure that discussion will continue, but for now, we want to thank both of you, Andy Mok, Duncan Clark.